Great Expectations, Chapter 10, The Other Convict. "You must get him out of England," Herbert told me when we were alone. "You will have to go with him, or else he won't go." As long as Magwitch lived in England, I was not free. I knew how much he wanted me to be his gentleman. I could not play the part anymore. I decided never to take another penny from this man. But I couldn't let Magwitch be captured. He had done so much for me, I could not let him die. Magwitch stayed in the privacy of our rooms all day. He only slipped outside for some fresh air at night, under the cover of darkness. One night, the gatekeeper told me he had seen a man with a scar watching our place. He had a rough-looking face and tattered clothes. He skulked around our house and under our windows. He must be after Magwitch, I thought. The very next morning, I asked Magwitch about the scar-faced man. Magwitch filled his pipe and started his story. "The man's name is Compeyson. I met him at the races years ago. He was a gentleman. He knew how to dress, but he was no better than a common thief. Compeyson took me on as a partner. He set up the swindles and the forgery and the stolen money, and I did the dirty work. He had brains, but no heart. When we were caught, Compeyson looked like a gentleman. I looked like a common wretch. He swore the only guilty one was me. He got 7 years while I got 14. I swore I would smash his face one day." Magwitch pounded his fist on the table. He stopped to catch his breath. "I escaped the prison ship, and so did Compeyson. I caught him on the marshes, and we fought the night I first met you. I made sure he was sent back to the hulks. I never heard from him again." Magwitch told me that Compeyson was a friend of Miss Havisham's half-brother. He was the man who'd pretended to love her. He was the one who left her on her wedding day. The pieces of this strange puzzle were starting to fit together. Herbert and I had to get Magwitch away from Compeyson. In a week, we moved him to Herbert's girlfriend's house at Mill Pond Bank. He would be safer there. The house was right on the river. Magwitch and I were catching a steamer out of England. Our escape would be fast and easy. Every evening, I rode past the house. I watched for a signal from Herbert. Herbert would tell us when it was safe to go. One day, Mr. Jaggers invited me to dinner, and I accepted. I took a coach to Mr. Jaggers' house. Molly, the housekeeper, served the food as soon as I got there. "Miss Havisham sent me a note," Mr. Pip said, my host. "She wishes to see you. You'll go, won't you?" I planned to go the next day. Jaggers had more news. Drumley and Estella were married. I had been so busy with Magwitch that I had forgotten all about them. Molly brought out the dessert. Again, she reminded me of someone I knew. Her eyes and the way she moved, her hands reminded me of Estella. Could this be Estella's real mother? I couldn't stop thinking about Molly and Estella all night. I left Jaggers' house early and went home. When the sun finally rose, I took the coach to Miss Havisham's house. It was gray and bleak. The garden was in ruins. The paths were overgrown. Most sad of all was the thought that Estella was gone. She was Mrs. Drumley now. She would never live with Miss Havisham again. Miss Havisham sat in the banquet room. She looked so lonely that I almost felt sorry for her. "Who is it?" she asked. "Come closer so I can see you." "It is I, Pip," I said, and entered the room. "Thank you for coming," she replied. I brought a chair to the hearth and sat down. Miss Havisham looked scared. I am not made of stone, you know, she began. Can you believe that there is anything human in my heart? She stretched out her hand, but pulled it back before she touched me. If you can ever forgive me, pray do it, she said, even if it is years from now and my broken heart is dust. Miss Havisham, I said, I forgive you now. I need forgiveness too for the hurt I've caused others. If I could undo what I have done to Estella, I would, cried Miss Havisham. She wrung her hands in despair. I regret it. I regret it so much. Whose child is Estella? I asked gently. Miss Havisham shook her head. You don't know. She shook her head again. Mr. Jaggers brought her, didn't he? Yes, she said. Jaggers brought her to me when she was only 2 or 3. I called her Estella. Her real mother had been charged with murder. Jaggers was her lawyer. He didn't tell me anything else about her mother, not even her name. Miss Havisham and I parted at twilight. The dying light matched my mood. In the courtyard, I turned to take a last look at the old house. Flames were shooting up in the window of the banquet room. I took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the room. Miss Havisham's faded wedding dress had caught fire. She was shrieking, "Fire, fire, save me!" I threw my coat over her and pushed her to the floor, hitting at the flames, but it was not enough. I swept the table clear of its feast. The rotten wedding cake smashed to the floor. I wrapped Miss Havisham in the tablecloth. She screamed like a wild animal. She tried to break free, but I held her tightly. At last the fire was out. Only smoke and cinders were left. Miss Havisham lay unconscious beside me. For the first time, I became aware of my hands. They were burned raw from the fire. The pain was unbearable. A doctor soon arrived and wrapped my hands. We put Miss Havisham to bed. She was weak with shock, and her burns were serious. Still, we hoped she would be fine with rest. Before leaving, I whispered in her ear, "I forgive you." I hope she heard me.